Hello and welcome to the Two Man Booth, currently the shortest weekly episodic wrestling podcast available on the internet, with me, Jonathan.
And me, Adam. And for the next hour, we will be taking you through the world of professional wrestling, the wonderful, crazy world it is. And to start off with this being our very first episode, we thought it would be a good idea to take you through what we like, what really appeals to us in the world of professional wrestling. So I'm going to throw it to Jonathan now, and he's going to take you through a little bit of his history in professional wrestling.
Okay, so for me, the first time that I actually knew of wrestling and was aware of wrestling was seeing the first SmackDown game when I was a kid. I went to a friend's house and he had the SmackDown game and I thought it was really cool. I thought The Rock was instantly the coolest guy in the world because I picked his character every single time. And from there I kind of watched Monday Night Heat or Sunday Night Heat, whenever it was on at that time in this country on Channel 4. But from then on, I've had an up and down relationship with American wrestling. I've really loved it at certain times and just been utterly sick of it at other times. But the type of wrestling that I've actually had the most relationship with over the last 10 to 11 years has been Japanese wrestling. I first discovered a promotion called Pro Wrestling Noah in around 2008, 2009. And after that, I then discovered New Japan Pro Wrestling. And from discovering New Japan and just deciding that I absolutely loved it, I then moved into other forms of Japanese wrestling. So that would be Pro Wrestling Noah, as I've mentioned before, but also All Japan Pro Wrestling. And then looking into even further the independent promotions in Japan, which can be very, very successful the majority of the time and run larger shows in several thousand seater arenas, which doesn't really happen in American wrestling. So that would be companies like Michinoku Pro Wrestling, Osaka Pro Wrestling, and any things like that. And that's been the type of promotions and the type of wrestling that I've been most into over the last 10 years. Adam?
Well, I think it's quite interesting. I think we've had somewhat similar backgrounds in wrestling, but also we've taken remarkably different paths at the same time. My first involvement in terms of sort of seeing wrestling was when I went round a friend's house and he was watching WrestleMania 13, which I know what you're all thinking. That's a hell of an introduction. But actually, for me, it was weird given how much time I now commit to professional wrestling on a almost weekly basis. It didn't grab me straight away. When I was watching it, I was a little bit bored early on, to be honest. But then a guy called Stone Cold Steve Austin came out, and that was where my love of professional wrestling really started. He came out, and I thought he looked like the coolest man I'd ever seen before. He had an attitude, a swagger about him that just really drew me to him. And as the match went on, I watched him wrestle Bret Hart in what I now know is a classic match, but at the time was just, what is this? And as he was passing out in that famous image of him passing out with blood streaming down his face and refusing to give up, I was hooked. That was it for me. Like, professional wrestling was now a huge part of my life and has been ever since. That match had such an impact on me that for years afterwards as a child, I couldn't stand Bret Hart, which in retrospect is absolutely ridiculous because he was utterly fantastic at his job. But for me at that point, it was unbelievably difficult to like that man because of what he'd done to my now hero. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was my favourite wrestler growing up from that point on, and probably still is to this day my favourite wrestler of all time. But over time, my interest changed. I caught on to WCW quite early into me wrestling watching, and that became a big part of it, watching Nitro as well as Monday Night Raw. And I also sort of caught ECW towards the end, but not massively. Ring of Honor came around in about 2004, and I was introduced to that by a friend as well. And that was around a time when I was starting to lose interest in WWE. I think it was actually early 2005, but the show he was watching was Final Battle 2004, which was headlined by Samoa Joe versus Austin Aries. And similar to my first experience with wrestling in terms of WrestleMania 13, he told me and he built up how amazing Ring of Honor was, and I could not wait to see great professional wrestling. And I watched the show, and not that much really grabbed me until the main event. And when I watched Aries Joe, again was hooked. And Ring of Honor has kind of become, in the same way that New Japan's kind of your company, Ring of Honor has always been my company. It's the company I have the most affinity for. And it probably always will be. There came a time in the mid-2000s where I fell totally out of love with WWE, and I just stopped watching it. And at that point, Ring of Honor and TNA became the only things I was really watching at the time. TNA, as we all know, has been very hit and miss over the years, so that was never a reliable source of great wrestling. It had its peaks, but it also had its troughs. And Ring of Honor kind of saved me towards the end, because I was really starting to fall out of love with professional wrestling, and even Ring of Honor wasn't massively doing it for me. And then Kevin Steen turned on El Generico at Final Battle 2009, and they had that year-long story which gripped me like nothing else. There was times where all I was watching in professional wrestling that year was Kevin Steen and El Generico segments. I'd watch the Ring of Honor shows, and I'd really only watch the El Generico and Kevin Steen segments. So I've got a lot to thank those guys for, I guess, because they kept my love of professional wrestling alive. And now we've gone quite deep into my history. So with that said, I think it's time to move on to the news.
That sounds good to me. I think the main news that we need to talk about probably is the biggest wrestling story in the last week, but it's been building up for the last year or so, really, is All Elite Wrestling.
Yeah, definitely.
Which has just come along. It's just been announced on New Year's Day in being the Elite, and I think everyone's really excited about it because no one really knows what it's going to be, if it's going to have a TV program, and who's going to be involved.
Yeah, we're in early stages with this, and I don't want to dampen anyone's fire or anything, but until such a time as we find out what the situation is with regards to TV deal, All Elite is kind of up in the air. I mean, the success they had with All In, nobody could have predicted that. When I heard that Cody wanted to sell out a 10,000-seater arena with Ring of Honor, I thought that was a bit of a pipe dream, at least for the time being. And when it turned out he wasn't doing it as a Ring of Honor show, it was going to be an independent thing that him and the Bucks and Hangman Page and all those guys were putting together, I thought it was doomed to failure. I really hoped it would do well, but I did think it was doomed to failure. Luckily, it was a massive success. I've no doubt Double or Nothing will be a massive success. All Elite Wrestling itself, we'll have to wait and see. The TV deal part of it is massive. If they can't get a lucrative TV deal, it's going to be difficult for them to deliver on the level that they want to deliver on.
Yeah, I know Meltzer and Alvarez have said on The Observer that there is a likelihood of them getting a TV deal, but it's not for certain. And without a TV deal, it'll die before it even gets started. If it does have a TV deal, it does seem to have enough interest from the hardcore wrestling fans to at least carry it for a while. It just entirely depends on who is going to be involved, and that's something that we'll talk about a little later in the episode, where we talk about people that we think may end up being involved.
I think it's interesting as well in the sense of the one thing that I really think benefits All Elite in terms of looking at their TV deal was the success of All In 0 Hour on WGN America. Not a massive station. I mean, it's bigger than what I would have expected them to get for a pre-show for All In, without doubt. But I think they drew around 250,000 viewers, which on that channel is a good number for them. Where they end up is massively up in the air, obviously, as we've said. But I think TV companies will look at that and go, that was a success. How can we get on board with this? And I think that's something that they will be able to take advantage of. And I really, really hope that they can get a good TV deal and we can see another strong company, because the more great professional wrestling out there, the better.
It's been said in the last week or so, as long as All Elite gets going, this is the best time that it has been to be a professional wrestler since the collapse and the death of WCW.
And that's interesting as well, because it's not just the All Elite factor. I mean, New Japan is obviously, and something we'll come on to later, they're making massive strides into the American market. They certainly seem to be up in the game this year in terms of what they're going to do. Ring of Honor are spending big now that they seem to have lost the access to the Elite. I mean, the sign of Bandido, the fact that they'd picked him up was actually amazing. Given that WWE were interested, All Elite were interested, so I think there's a lot to be interested in professional wrestling at the moment.
I think it's purely based on the fact that All In was so successful.
Mm-hmm.
I think if All In had failed or just had drawn okay, then there wouldn't be half this interest. But the fact that All In drew really well, but the feel of the show was so cool, and lots of it felt like a throwback to sort of a bygone era that a lot of fans look back to and want to come back. But then so much of it felt really fresh as well. It was very much that blend of the old and the new, which I think a lot of wrestling fans are looking for nowadays. I think that's, at least for now, we're stood on All Elite.
Mm-hmm.
As the weeks go on and more things happen, we'll keep everyone up to date. I think one thing that we do need to talk about, and this is a much sadder note than All Elite, is the death of Gene Okerlund this week.
Yeah, I mean, me and Gene was massively involved in so much good about 1980s, 1970s, and even 1990s professional wrestling. He's the guy most people think of when they look at The Interviewer.
I tell you something, being Gene.
He had such a big impact on the interview segments he was in. He was such a massive part. He seemed to have this ability, even with people who we wouldn't necessarily consider great interviews, to get a great interview out of them. And the fact that he's passed on is I think, such a sad moment. But what a career he had.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about his ability to coax great promos out of people, one of the ones I always think about is the famous Hulk Hogan heel turn promo. I would never say that Hogan, when you give examples, you say people that weren't great promos, he could get them out of them. Hogan was undoubtedly a great promo and absolutely fantastic on the mic. But Hogan delivers a very, very good heel promo, but it's the way that Okerlund drives the promo forward as the crowd reacts and throws rubbish into the ring. Okerlund is able to use that and sort of include that in Hogan's promo and help him drive it forward. And then you get the famous line that Hogan says about the people being the exact same as the rubbish that's in the ring. Mm-hmm. And that great iconic line is not there if Okerlund's not there to drive it forward.
Yeah, massively agree on that one. I think the next thing we would now pick up on is the Crockett Cup is coming back, and this is something I'm very excited about. 1980s NWA is so my bag, and they're bringing it back. NWA and ROH have announced that they're going to do a deal together where they co-produce the Crockett Cup. I don't expect it to be the level of the 1980s Crockett Cups, especially 86. Nothing's going to touch that. But I think bringing that back in 2019 is going to be such a nostalgia throwback, and I really can't wait. We haven't had a massive amount announced yet, and it's coming up in April, but I am hugely looking forward to the Crockett Cup.
I think it benefits Ring of Honor for certain, but I think it benefits the NWA a lot in having Ring of Honor involved. Ring of Honor, which is an incredibly stable wrestling promotion, has been for quite a few years now, for the NWA that is very focused on rebuilding itself back up and sort of getting back the identity of what the National Wrestling Alliance should be. I think to be affiliated with Ring of Honor, at least for a short amount of time, really helps. I mean, we saw the NWA champ Nick Aldis come out on Ring of Honor shows. I think that can only benefit the NWA moving forward, and anything that can help the NWA sort of get back its prestige, and that title specifically is something I think most wrestling fans would support.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the relationship going forward as well, because obviously the inference that NWA were getting involved with ROH actually came about due to All In. When All Elite gets off the ground, is that relationship with the NWA and ROH going to remain, or NWA going to have a relationship with All Elite? I think the key thing, and it's probably one thing we didn't mention during the All Elite segment earlier, is on the 5th of January, New Japan, Ring of Honor, and All Elite were all meeting to discuss what the potential future relationship could be. Now, nothing's come out of that meeting yet. We don't know what was said, what the outcome was, but obviously it's going to be interesting because All Elite are going to be in direct competition with Ring of Honor. And what does that mean for all the relationships going forward?
because All Elite and Ring of Honor are now basically competing for the number 2 spot. And Ring of Honor has worked so hard to rebuild itself back up from where it was. They're not going to be giving that number 2 place up without a fight. But at the same time, All Elite they're gonna have so much momentum behind them. If they get that TV deal, they'll have a lot of momentum behind them. I think the last thing that we need to talk about in terms of big wrestling news this week, and it's going to be something that's going to flow into our first big topic, is going to be about New Japan's announcements regarding its scheduling this year. It's made some absolutely massive announcements for this year and for the start of next year. We've just had Wrestle Kingdom in the Tokyo Dome on January 4th, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But there's been massive announcements. They've announced that they're still going to run 3 nights at Budokan for the G1 Climax. They drew very, very well there last year for the G1. The shows were a massive success. And anyone that knows about Japanese history in terms of professional wrestling knows how important the Budokan is for professional wrestling. It used to be, in the olden days, it used to be the absolute bedrock of all Japan Pro Wrestling. They would run that building, they would get it on the cheap, and they would run it on a regular basis for their massive matches. And then Pro Wrestling Noah, when that split off, that had the same thing. So for New Japan to be able to continue that lineage and tradition in Japanese wrestling is a big deal, and to continue to draw that well.
Yeah, and I think they've announced some other huge dates as well. The fact that they're going to be opening the G1 Climax in the United States, I think, signals that they are serious about this international exposure, this international outreach. They're not just throwing a show out there. It's going to be the opening day of G1. That's huge. And they're running the American Airlines Arena in Dallas, which can hold up to 17,000 people. Now, when you put the stage in there, I don't know what the overall attendance figure will look like, but if they can draw huge for that show, which I think they probably should, it's the opening night of G1. They've drawn very well in the Californias for most of their shows with very little announced. You're going to have a full lineup to announce this time. So I can only imagine that that's going to be a success going forward. But that's going to be the first major test for New Japan in the United States.
Which is interesting because we've talked about the United States and New Japan, and there's already been this established interest. We've talked about and we've known about how there's actually been more interest than New Japan have actually allocated for seats. You know, New Japan they've ran smaller buildings than there is actually interest. What is interesting is that they're making their first inroads into this country as well, into the United Kingdom. That's something that we're both very, very interested in, and we're hoping to get to that show and to see what happens. Zack Sabre Jr. has already spoken about that show and how he's desperate to be on that show and wants to defend the title that he won at Wrestle Kingdom on that show. I think the biggest thing is that New Japan announced, obviously next year, January 4th, they will be running the Tokyo Dome again, which is a yearly tradition, even in the years where New Japan was struggling financially. They still ran the Tokyo Dome because it would be like WWE not running WrestleMania. It would just be such a prestige hit that they couldn't do it. However, what they've also announced is that their New Year's Dash show, which is held the day after Wrestle Kingdom, it's sort of like the Raw after WrestleMania for Japanese fans. That's also going to be held in the Tokyo Dome, and that's going to be a massive deal. Firstly, because it's been run in Korakuen Hall for years and years and years, and Korakuen holds around 1,800, but it can be pushed for big events to around 2,100 in its sort of modern state. But it's also the first time in a very, very long time that New Japan has ran more than one dome show a year. And it's really a testament to how well they're doing financially and to their attempts to really grow and really grow back towards what they were in 1999 in their heyday. And it really shows the growth of New Japan in recent years.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And I think it's about time that they ran something bigger. I must say I was kind of shocked when we were watching the show and they made the announcement that they were going to run the New Year's Dash at the Tokyo Dome. They didn't actually announce it was going to be New Year's Dash. I think we're all assuming that because it's the 5th of January. There has been a couple of people talking about the fact that it might be a 2-day Wrestle Kingdom. I certainly hope it's the latter, but that's certainly something that's been raised. I just think that they've reached a point where New Year's Dash has become, like you said, their Raw after WrestleMania. And I think it's something that they've not fully taken advantage of until now. Going back to what Meltzer was saying about on The Observer the other day, he mentioned that the amount of tickets they could have sold was in the region of 20,000. There is no building in Tokyo apart from the Dome that you can run that holds that amount of people. So it was almost like they had to run the Tokyo Dome. They'd reached a point where the interest level was so high, they had to run the Tokyo Dome for New Year's Dash. It's going to be interesting to see how they do next year. I think it's a big test. There's 2 big tests, I think, for them next year in terms of attendance draws. One being New Year's Dash, which is massively important, and one this year, which is the Best of the Super Juniors being held at Ryogoku, because that is a massive venue for them to hold the Best of the Super Juniors in, especially in an era where, although they've rebuilt the junior heavyweight division somewhat, it's still seen as a lot way below the heavyweight scene. And it'll be interesting to see how they draw up that show for the juniors.
I agree totally. One of my favourite things about 1990s New Japan is the junior division. They used to run shows. They ran several shows solely with junior heavyweights that drew massive crowds. The Super J Cup drew massive crowds, largely based on New Japan talent, but also based on New Japan bringing people in. And the junior division has never really regained what it was back then. That's partly because of the booking that it received in the year 2000 when Jushin Thunder Liger, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and one of my absolute favourites, was pushed to easily defeat every single junior heavyweight that they had on their roster, but then faced the heavyweight champion at the time and was soundly beaten. And it very much proved the fact that juniors were worse. And it shouldn't necessarily be that way. It should just be that it's a different weight limit. It shouldn't be that they're worse at wrestling. It just means that they have different skill sets because of their size. But, as you say, to run Ryogoku is a massive deal. Massive deal.
Certainly agree with that. And with that sort of said, I think we've covered everything that needs to be said in the New Japan schedule. So it's time to go on to our main event of the evening. It's time to go on to Wrestle Kingdom 13. So the show opened with Kota Ibushi versus Will Ospreay for the Never Openweight Championship.
Interesting match.
It was an incredible match. Very hard hitting. We obviously know now, as we're recording this on Sunday, that there was a concussion suffered by Kota Ibushi. New Japan have announced that it wasn't a serious concussion, which is obviously good news. But that was one negative that kind of took away from the match for me, was seeing Kota Ibushi legitimately hurt afterwards. But an absolutely incredible match. Those 2 guys threw everything at each other. I thought it was a massive moment maker for Will Ospreay. He came out of that match looking like an absolute superstar. Kota Ibushi did everything in his power to put him over, and Will Ospreay absolutely delivered in the big spotlight.
I think it's a testament to the movement that New Japan's had over the last several years, where it's not necessarily been what we were talking about earlier. It's not necessarily been about juniors and heavies. The openweight title was meant to be that, but it's sort of, as time's gone on, it's been just a heavyweight title, and juniors have always kind of lost the title matches that they've had for it. So for Ospreay, who is a junior really in size, but maybe making the progression towards heavyweight, for him to beat Ibushi, it was certainly a big deal. The match, I thought itself, was absolutely fantastic. At the end, I was very much going, as I saw Ibushi not moving, his eyes not really opening very much, and him being carried out of the ring. However, the match itself was fantastic. It was very, very, very strong style in terms of lots of hard hitting, lots of stiff strikes. And I agree that I think it was a breakout performance for Ospreay. We've seen Ospreay develop over the last several years, 5 years, and he's slowly got better and better and better. I think he's using this as well as a means to evolve his character. and that he's not just going to be a guy that does, he said, the flippy dippy guy in his interview backstage. He's going to be a guy that also can kick your head in. And I think that match proved that. I loved it.
Definitely. We moved on after that to the Triple Threat Junior Tag Team Championship match. This was a short match. They weren't given a great deal of time, but I think that was probably the right call because the crowd seemed to be on such a high during the Ospreay Bushi match. It was a cool down match, but they also used it in a smart way because it was Shingo Takagi's breakout New Japan moment. This was the match where they showcased Shingo Takagi. That was all that this match was built around. He absolutely dominated the last few minutes, won clean as a whistle in the centre of the ring. No doubt who was the star of the match. And it'd be interesting to see what goes on with Shingo going forward, especially with the hopeful return of Hiromu. Does he stay junior? Does he move up to the heavyweight division? Where does Shingo Takagi go from here? The match itself I thought was good. Like I said, they didn't get a great deal of time, never got a chance to get great. But for the time they were given, I thought they did a tremendous job. And I think everybody involved in it came out looking good. Interesting note, I think, for Sho and Yo in terms of where do they go from here. I feel like it's singles where we're going with them. I think they both have potential. One maybe slightly more than the other, but I think they both have potential as single superstars, and I definitely think that that's the direction we're going with them.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about Sho and Yo before. We both think that they're fantastic wrestlers, but we do see more potential in Sho. But I do think that's the way that they'll go down the line, is that they will split. But we'll talk about what happened with them regarding New Year's Dash later on in the show. I thought this match was good without being great. I agree, it didn't have the time to become great. I think it very, very much served to make Shingo. I think that was the whole point of the match, was to make Shingo look good. And I totally agree with everything that you've said regarding that everyone put in the work, everyone worked really hard, and it made Shingo look great on his first Wrestle Kingdom. What was great for me to see also, however, was that Bushi got a reign. He's already been given sort of his thank you junior reign a couple of years ago, but I think it was nice now that the junior division's been rebuilt. He's been given this as well, and I'll be honest, any time that LIJ win anything, could be a 6-man tag on a random tour show, or it could be Naito winning the heavyweight title, which should happen. But anytime LIJ wins anything, I'm a massive fan of that. But I really enjoyed the match. Like I said, I didn't love it, but I think after Ospreay Goto, I needed to calm down. It was almost like the classic, WWE when they send out, unfortunately the way it used to be, when they send out the divas back then, to calm the crowd down. It almost felt like that, but a very productive way of doing that.
Totally agree. I thought it was perfect placement and perfect booking of that match, considering what it just came from. But we moved on after that to another fantastic match. Tomohiro Ishii, Zack Sabre Jr., British Heavyweight Championship. This was, considering how short it was, this was an absolutely incredible match. They got 11 minutes. And what they did with 11 minutes was utterly phenomenal. Sabre, I think, is somebody New Japan are positioning to have a big year. There's quite a few guys we'll talk about going through this who are going to have big years, but I definitely feel like they've got something in mind for Zack Sabre Jr. He had a big year last year, won the New Japan Cup, tore Hiroshi Tanahashi pretty much in half on his way to winning the New Japan Cup. Had a great match with Kazuchika Okada during his legendary title reign. But this felt like a really big match for him as well. And I know we've already mentioned 2 matches in, 2 star-making performances. This felt like another one for Zack Sabre Jr. And the match itself was hard-hitting. It was different to anything else on the show. It really stood out to me in that way. And I think that was one of the key things about most of the matches on the show, is they really stood out from each other. It wasn't just one match after another and they were all following a formula. This was a really interesting one, and I think what was really great was Sabre took a lot of this match. So as I was watching it, I was thinking, man, Sabre's losing this match. It felt like Sabre was taking that so he could keep his heat, and at the end, he won. And more to the point, Ishii submitted. That's huge. That never happens. I mean, it's Tomohiro Ishii. It's a man with no neck. That man does not submit. But it was a great match.
I mean, Sabre just hates limbs, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
I just don't think he likes people having arms and legs, and I just think he wants to rip them off people. I love this match. You are correct. It was totally different to anything else on the show, and I think it was deliberately booked to be like that. Every Sabre match that I've ever seen is different to every other match I ever see on the show that he's on. He is one of my favourite wrestlers in the world. He doesn't wrestle like anybody else. And just watching him do groundwork and put people in submissions is absolutely beautiful. I do agree that I think Sabre's in for a big year this year. I think the fact that he was given the New Japan Cup last year already shows that New Japan has faith in him. They wouldn't do that if they didn't have faith in anybody. But I do think he'll probably have a pretty good run. I don't think he'll go into the last day competing or anything like that. But I would expect Sabre to have a pretty good run in the G1 this year. Maybe beat someone like Tanahashi or someone who's in the main event level. That would not shock me. If Sabre was to get something like the US title or something along those lines, or be a tag champ with Misu this year, because Misu should just get titles all the time. That wouldn't shock me. That really wouldn't shock me. I think he's in for a big year.
I think we could see him maybe ascend a bit more than that. Maybe I'm seeing more in it than you are, but I feel like Sabre could be stepping sort of intercontinental level this year. That's where I see his year going. Definitely having a good run in the G1. If he's not Intercontinental Champion, I could see something like maybe pins the champion in G1, gets the shot at King of Pro Wrestling. Something like that. I expect him to have a big year. I don't expect him to win the G1. I don't expect him to win the Heavyweight Championship, but I do expect him to have a relatively big year. And from there, we went on to probably the match I was least looking forward to on the show. The Triple Threat Heavyweight Tag Team Championship match. I'm not the biggest fan of the Gorillas of Destiny. I will just get that out of the way early on.
We share that.
Mm-hmm. And this match was a lot better than I expected it to be. I think, and I'm not using this as a way to bury the Gorillas of Destiny, but because they were involved relatively little in this match. This match was really well worked between Evil and Sonata and the Young Bucks. And again, it was another fun match. I don't think it was a great match, but I think it was very fun. And Evil and Sonata winning the titles is absolutely the right thing for me. I think they can now become the new Tenkoji in terms of those people that are going to be around that tag division for a long time to come and have a lot of success in it.
I agree. I think, again, NIJ winning anything is really good. But Evil and Sonata have been the most consistent tag team that they've had in quite a long time. They are always popular. They're always over. I mean, LIJ are sort of technically heels, but they are beloved by everybody. So I think it was the right decision. I'm glad, and don't want this to sound horrendous, but I'm very glad that Gorillas of Destiny did not win. Purely because I'm not a massive fan of their act. I never have been. As long as they don't win the tag titles or anything like that, they are more than serviceable as part of the roster. I've just never liked them. However, this match was, I agree, totally, was a lot better than what we expected it to be going in. And I agree that was part of that was the Gorillas of Destiny not really being in the match that much. But when they were in, they did what they had to do and they performed their roles really well. I do feel like, Tama Tonga would almost, if he was wrestling in America, he'd be a fantastic manager. I just don't enjoy his work, I must be honest.
Unless he's hitting the gun stuff, because
that's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I think the next match would probably be my least favourite match on this card, and it's not even a knock on the match necessarily because this card was so good. But I did feel like this was probably the one that underwhelmed me the most. I felt like this could have been Juice Robinson's making moment. I felt like when he lost the US title, a lot of people got annoyed by that, I think. And I felt like there was a bigger story at play. And I felt like they wanted to give him a big win on a big stage at Wrestle Kingdom. And that is what happened. But this was very definitively a Cody match. And I've got a lot of time for Cody as a human being. And I have got a lot of time for him as a professional wrestler in the right setting. But when he sets out to have a certain style of match like this, sometimes it drags a little, and I think it did here with the constant interference from Brandy until she was thrown out, and just the way the match was worked. And I don't feel like it translated well to the Japanese audience either. It was probably the match that I would say got less reaction. But Juice won, which was probably the most important thing. Really good match. Not a really good match, but a really good moment for him. And definitely something that I think they need to build on this year, because Juice has got a lot of popularity, especially with the Japanese crowds and especially when they come over to America.
Yeah, I really agree when you talk about it not translating very well to the Japanese audience. I'm very much a New Japan traditionalist. I always have been, because I got into New Japan at a time when things were still very traditional, before things changed a lot in the last several years when Gedo started booking it a lot more. However, I think the Japanese audience has adjusted and has adapted to things like interference a lot more. They're a lot more accepting of different booking styles. But I just don't think they like this. I'll be honest. I don't think they liked it. There can be too much interference. The Japanese audience tends to be okay with a little bit. They started to get used to it with NWO Japan way back in the late 90s that did it a fair bit. However, too much, and it just tends to make them sick. And they just don't understand why people wouldn't just come out and help anyway. But yeah, I agree. It was a really cool moment for Juice. Juice is clearly someone that's really liked by the Japanese audience, has been really loyal to New Japan since he came over, and he's worked really hard, and he has arguably improved more than most wrestlers in the world over the last several years. He's improved a lot from where he was when he was in NXT.
Took a big risk as well, like leaving NXT. He asked for his release and then going in as a young lion, not being brought over by New Japan, but actually going in as a young lion and being brought up through the system that way. He ascended a lot quicker than most of their young lions do, but that was his entry into New Japan was that way. He wasn't AJ Styles coming over as already a big superstar guy who they were going to push immediately. He was taking a massive gamble with his career, and I'm really glad it's paid off for him.
I think in the eyes of the Japanese audience as well, coming in and being like, I'll work my way up from the bottom. I'm almost a young boy. And coming up and doing that endears you as a babyface to the Japanese audience. They can respect you, and they know that you're there to stay as well, because you're going to be there for a long time. So I think that's helped the Japanese fans love him. But to be fair, his work has improved a lot more, and his character is very interesting and very different to the kind of things that are traditionally seen on a New Japan show.
Yeah, and with that we move to the Junior Heavyweight Championship match, with Kushida defending against Taiji Ishimori. Again, this was a match I felt like could have done with a little bit more time. I thought it was a very good match. I thoroughly enjoyed what I saw, but I did feel like there was potential, if they'd given them 5 or 6 more minutes, given the talent that was in the ring, that we could have had a classic here. But they clearly were working towards a time schedule, and they had to give a lot of time to the main event. They had to give a lot of time to the semi-main. So there's only so many matches you can give a lot of time to if you're looking to finish by a certain point. So I understand why this maybe didn't get the time I would have usually expected, but in the time it was there, it was very good. And I think, again, this felt like a moment for Taiji Ishimori. I think he's going to be one of the key components of the junior heavyweight division going forward. And this felt like almost a handing over of the reins from Kushida to Taiji Ishimori. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Kushida going forward, because there's a lot of rumours going around. WWE are interested. Where will he end up? Is he going to stay with New Japan? And this certainly felt like him going, I've been the ace of this division for quite a few years now. I'm handing the reins over to Taiji Ishimori. That's what it felt like to me when I was watching. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I felt the match was okay. I didn't love it, but I thought it was good. Not great. I've watched a lot of Kushida matches. I've watched a lot of Taiji Ishimori matches. He's someone who has. I don't think he's improved. I think it's just someone that I have noticed more in the last couple of years. I know you have liked him in the past a lot more than I have, and I think that's partly just because I haven't seen the right things in him, as stupid as that sounds. I do agree that it's very much a handing over moment. I don't necessarily think it's maybe it's not to Taiji, but I think Kushida is now going to be treated necessarily as no longer the guy in the junior division. I don't think that his acehood in the junior division has gone quite the way that New Japan wanted it to. He has delivered matches. I would never say that Kushida's not good in the ring, but I don't think he's become the Tanahashi or the Okada of the junior division in the way that they wanted him to. And there are various reasons for that. Kushida's now in his mid-30s. He's not really at a point in his career where he can continue to do the same thing in New Japan, because he'll get to a point soon where it'll be like, right, well, we've seen you for so long, what else have you got? So I think, really, for Kushida, from personal advice, going to WWE would be a really smart decision. I think he fits the American style a lot. Not better than the Japanese style, but he suits it really well. He's worked America before with Ring of Honor, and I think he would do really well. Bearing in mind, he would likely have to go through developmental, and he's going to need a couple of years, well, a year or so at the least, to get up to the main roster. I think making the move now would be a smart decision. I do think the junior division is going to be in limbo a little bit this year, because the star of that division is very clearly Hiromu Takahashi. He's an absolutely fantastic wrestler, and we're waiting for him to come back, and hopefully he comes back 100%, still the wrestler that he was. Just, I hope he doesn't try to injure himself quite as much as he has in the past, but he's clearly the star of the division.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, but I think in New Japan's mind, there has to be somebody to hold that division together. And if Kushida is indeed leaving, which if I was to be a betting man, I'd say he is. If he is to be leaving and we don't know when Hiromu's going to be back, I definitely think that we now need to look at Taiji Ishimori as the face of that division for a time being. He might only be
WWE.
He might only be a placeholder until such a time as Hiromu can come back and claim his rightful crown, but he certainly is the guy for right now.
Yeah, I agree.
The next match was a really, really interesting match, and something we'd talked about a lot going into it. And I'll just tell a little bit of story going into this. When we were talking about this before the show, we were actually talking about how if we were booking New Japan, we would have been calling the finish to this match in the ring. Because Jay White versus Kazuchika Okada was something where we felt if they were having a really good match, Jay White should win and get that big win in a great match that would really put him over as a superstar. If the match was bang average, we would have changed tack and had Okada win, because we think it would have hurt Jay White more than help him, having him win a match that just wasn't all that good. And I've seen some reaction to this match around the internet where people have really liked it but maybe not loved it. I thought it was great. I thought this was the first match since Ibushi Ospreay where I thought this was blow away good. The finishing sequence might be my favourite finishing sequence to a match that I've ever seen. The reversals were unbelievable. They were so creative. Everything was so fluid. This was, and I feel like I'm repeating myself here, this was a star-making performance for Jay White. And we'll go into New Year's Dash a little bit later on, but wow, he feels like he's the guy they're pushing big time this year.
Yeah, I think Jay White is definitely the man of 2019 for New Japan. There's been discussion before by those much higher up in New Japan how they have the young star in Okada, but they wanted a second. And I think they decided quite some time ago that Jay White was going to be that man. I love this match. It was very clearly an Okada match in the way that it was structured. And when you say that the ending sequence was really good, you know, Okada does really great ending sequences. In other news, grass is also green. It was absolutely fantastic. I love this match. I was worried that it wasn't going to be a good match and they were still going to have Jay White win, because I think that wouldn't have helped Jay and it would definitely have harmed Okada. But the match was great. Okada had another great match. I don't think he's ever had a bad match since he was a young lion. And of all of the star-making performances on this show, I think Jay White's was the star-making performance. We'll talk about New Year's Dash just after we finish talking about Wrestle Kingdom, but New Year's Dash solidified a lot of what I've just said. I think Jay White has come on leaps and bounds in his ability to carry himself, his charisma, and his ability to talk. I can't say enough good things about Jay White at the moment, really.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I feel like this was the match I'd been waiting to see from him. He had a really good match with Juice Robinson in the States, and I felt like that was a little bit his coming out party. I liked the match with Tanahashi at last year's Wrestle Kingdom more than a lot of people, but this felt like the moment where I went, okay, Jay White's a star. Like, I saw it for the first time in full effect. The one thing that we didn't mention, that we absolutely need to mention before we move on from this match, is Okada came back. The Okada came back. No more pants. This is amazing news. This might be the best news of the whole show. So that was an amazing moment for me, seeing Okada come back out like that, because I remember the disappointment on my face when he came out with those pants at last year's Wrestle Kingdom. So I'm glad we're back to normal.
It was more how it actually made Okada look smaller. Okada's a very tall man. He's not super broad, but he's broad, and it made him look quite small. For the whole year, I've just hated them. When Adam and I have always talked about wrestling, and when we've written wrestling together in the past, I've always been the guy who looks at how people look and the way that they present themselves, and it just seemed like a total own goal for me. It just looked terrible. So for him to come out looking like the Rainmaker again, and how we think of the Rainmaker, that was a big deal. But it's also a big deal that he came out looking like the Rainmaker and lost clean. I think that's a big deal.
Okada might have the most interesting year going forward in terms of what happens with Okada this year. I don't think there's anybody else I have more interest in this year than seeing where Okada goes. He had, in my opinion, probably the greatest title reign in history, which ended in Dominion last year. And to see him sort of not really do all that much since has worried me a little bit, but I think it's all going to play into the story, and I feel like him losing clean as the old Okada signifies that he needs to evolve. And knowing how Gedo books and likes to book almost up to 2 years in advance, I feel like there'll be a lot of long-term plan going into this, and I've got a lot of faith in them telling this story really well, so I can't wait to see where they go with that. But that brings us on to our semi-main event, our main event part 1, as they referred to it on Wrestle Kingdom.
Finally got his main event.
Got it last year, but this time he won. So Tetsuya Naito going for his beloved, heavy sarcasm there, Intercontinental Championship against the craziest lunatic on planet Earth, armed with more swear words than I know words, Chris Jericho. I thought this was always going to be a good match. This blew my expectations out of the water. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I was very close between this and Ibushi Ospreay in terms of what was my second favourite match on the show, but I did think that maybe Ibushi Ospreay had the edge, but that does not take away from how great this match was, because it was absolutely fantastic. And the fact that Chris Jericho, at his age, can still go to this level. And it's the fact that he's smart about how he can go. He's not going to go out there and try and keep up with Tetsuya Naito in a technical classic, because he knows he can't do that anymore. He's not got the speed, he's not got the longevity in terms of stamina. But what he has got is a wrestling IQ that is second to none. And he went out there and he had the type of match that he could have. He nearly killed Naito with a DDT, or rather Naito nearly killed himself. But apart from that, it was absolutely brilliant. And I just absolutely love this match, everything about it. And Naito winning the Intercontinental Championship back, really interesting. I don't know whether you saw the press conference after, where he was talking about the belt, and he was sort of disrespectful, but then at the end he says, "This belt keeps coming back to me, almost like it loves me," or words to that effect. And I feel like there's something in there, so whether we see Naito start to show this championship some respect now, it's going to be interesting to see where that goes.
I think in the way that title used to be Shinsuke Nakamura's, I think it's very definitely Tetsuya Naito's now, in that it means the most when that person's holding it. For Nakamura, it always felt more important when Nakamura held it, and then for Naito, it now feels very, very important again. His story with that title is almost as complicated and cleverly told a story as anything I've seen in wrestling, really, for a very long time, because his story with that title is so complex. Regarding the match itself, I don't think I loved it quite as much as you, but I really enjoyed it. I'm astounded by Jericho and his ability to still have great matches, even at the age that he's at. I love his ability to constantly evolve and constantly adapt his character. You know, he's gone from being the man who's got a very childish list to being an absolutely crazy guy. who wears face paint and just destroys his opponent and swears at them a lot. He's got like his own Bible or his own dictionary, of swear words. But yeah, I love this match. And Naito winning was an important moment for Naito, and it's always nice when Naito walks out of Wrestle Kingdom on top. Where Jericho goes from this in New Japan, I do not know. He has mentioned that he wants to face Tanahashi for the IWGP title, but we'll see where that goes later down the line and what his involvement is with the aforementioned All Elite Wrestling.
I think the really interesting thing for me with regards to Jericho and New Japan, and obviously we've talked All Elite, I think the really interesting thing for me is, where does Chris Jericho fit into their plans for Madison Square Garden? Because if he's at that show,
Draw.
That's huge. I mean, they've sold the building now, but that is huge for them in terms of people coming back to their events. Because if somebody's bought tickets to that show thinking, "Ooh, what's this New Japan? Why is it so popular?"
Yeah.
And they see Chris Jericho go out there and have a blow-away match against, say, Tanahashi, they'll come back. I don't think and I think you'd get that with New Japan anyway because they deliver so much on their big shows. But I think it'd be interesting to see if he's involved in that show. We know he's been a bit back and forth on whether he'll work in the States, not for WWE. All it's going to be an issue. New Japan, what's going to go on with Jericho this year is going to be interesting. But now it's time for the main event, and what a main event we had. Hiroshi Tanahashi, the G1 Climax winner, coming up to face the man who beat Kazuchika Okada, Kenny Omega. I've not loved the build for this match, I'll be honest. I felt it was a little bit too twee. It didn't inspire me that much, but I just wanted to see Hiroshi Tanahashi win this match so much. The build didn't really matter that much to me. And when they started wrestling and went on through this match, it was pretty flawless, if I'm being honest. And I was unbelievably invested. I was on the literal edge of my seat, as Jonathon can attest to. And when Tanahashi won, it was an amazing moment and a real feel-good moment. And it feels like the ace is back.
Very much so from New Year's Dash. I love this. I love this match. I totally agree with you on the build-up. The build-up was largely based on the fact that they both had different ideas about styles and the way that New Japan should be moving forward. That's a feature that's always been part of New Japan, this idea that strong style is the strongest. But then I kind of look at both of them and I don't really necessarily see either of them as defining strong style. I think if you're going to pick someone that defines strong style in recent times, I think you'd look at Shinsuke Nakamura, to be honest. But the match itself was unbelievable. I agree. I wanted Tanahashi to win this match, and I didn't really care whether Omega won it. I really wanted Tanahashi to win this match. Unfortunately, we were watching the show hours later, and I went on YouTube. Stupid decision, I know. And I then saw who had won this match before we saw the match itself. I saw nothing else from the rest of the show, so I was able to watch the majority of it spoiler-free. However, I did see the result of this match, much to my annoyance. However, despite the fact that I knew what the ending was going to be, I loved the match as if I had never seen. It was absolutely fantastic. I even bought, which perhaps shows that I was a bit tired or a bit stupid. I don't know.
Maybe a bit invested.
We'll go with that. I several times bought the finishes that Omega was going for. Several V-triggers that looked like they should kick someone's head halfway across the dome. But when Tanahashi hit the high five floor, I was absolutely chuffed. And Tanahashi means quite a lot to me. Adam knows this already. When I got into New Japan Pro Wrestling in 2009, the first New Japan show that I saw fully was Wrestle Kingdom 3. And the main event to that show was Hiroshi Tanahashi facing Keiji Muto, who's the Great Muta, if no one else has seen Japanese wrestling that much before. And they were facing each other for the IWGP title. Muto was then with All Japan, but had invaded and won the title. And Tanahashi beat Muto, and they're very similar in terms of their styles. He beat Muto to win the title, and that was the moment when Tanahashi was confirmed as the ace of New Japan. So that was it was a really important moment for me to see Tanahashi regain the title and regain his ace hood. So it was a really cool moment for me, and to end Wrestle Kingdom with Tanahashi ending the show was kind of the way that I remember most Wrestle Kingdoms ending, to be honest. So it was a great moment.
And we got the air guitar back as well.
Always loved the air guitar. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's both the coolest. It's both the coolest and the least cool thing in the world. But because Tanahashi does it, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, I think with that, we'll just sum up with thoughts. I thought this was a absolutely fantastic show. I thought the main event was. It's going to be difficult to be for match of the year for me, to be honest. I think the show was absolutely fantastic. Maybe a step down from the last couple of Wrestle Kingdoms, but I'm pretty much picking between great movies here in terms of trying to compare them. I don't think it was quite as good as last year's, but I still loved the show, and I thought everything delivered. And apart from maybe that Cody Juice match, but the main event blew everything out of the water, and somebody's going to have to go really, really hard this year to try and beat that match.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. It was a very, very good show. It wasn't what last year's was, but Wrestle Kingdom is always one of the best shows of the year. New Japan have a proven track record at delivering every year several of the best matches of the year and the best show of the year, usually, depending on what else New Japan run during the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved it.
And with that said, I'm going to sort of throw this over to you, Jonathan, because although I have fully read the reports and everything, I did not actually see New Year's Dash. So give us some feedback. How was the show?
Pretty good without being great, unfortunately. So we mentioned earlier that they're running, well, possibly New Year's Dash, but they're running a show the day after January 4th at the Tokyo Dome. So people who thought that was going to be New Year's Dash, we usually expect it to be like the Raw after Mania, where lots of big things happen. There were lots of like heel turns, face turns, and surprises, and they did that last year. Last year was a massive year. We saw Switchblade almost join the Bullet Club, but then turn and join Chaos. We saw Ibushi and Omega sort of begin to continue their story of reuniting. And there were several big moments last year. This year wasn't so much that, really. The key takeaways there were from that show. First off, Chase Owens and Yujiro Takahashi rejoined the Bullet Club. That wasn't necessarily a big moment, but they helped the Bullet Club to retain their never openweight 6-man tag titles. So that was a first big moment. Purely just because it gets the Bullet Club back together, gets the band back together, and it makes sense for Yujiro and it makes sense for Chase because otherwise they don't really have that much to do.
Yeah, if the Elite were sticking around, I think Chase and Yujiro were a nice sort of juxtaposition to the rest of the Elite. But the fact that they're probably gone and Omega may be gone as well, I think it definitely is the best move for Chase and Yujiro to rejoin the Bullet Club. And I think it's more cannon fodder, for lack of a better word, for Jay White to have around him. And I think it's definitely the right move for them. Not massively interesting, but you'll come on to the most interesting thing of New Year's Dash right now.
Because it wasn't necessarily such a great show, the matches were okay. I've got no complaint of the matches not being good. They were just okay. There were two other big things that happened, really. The first one was Taichi defeating Naito. Before the match, Taichi hit Naito with a chair, and that sort of was brought in the story, really, in that it was a broad match largely throughout. And the match ended with Taichi hitting Naito with the title and then defeating him. I have a sneaky suspicion, I was mentioning this to you earlier, wasn't I, Adam? I have a sneaky suspicion that the decision to put Taichi against Naito for the IC title is not something that was planned. As we've mentioned, Gedo likes to book New Japan quite a long way in advance. And I think he has plans for the IC title this year that he's already booked. I think he has plans for Naito that he's already decided on. And I think, quite possibly, Kota Ibushi, who was not on the show as a result of his concussion sustained the night before. I believe that he was meant to be the one facing Naito at one of the New Beginning shows. And I believe that simply Taichi's kind of just been put in as a placeholder for now, really.
See, Gator's not going to want to ruin the rest of his booking by changing everything up.
Changes the whole
So Taichi, I guess, is just a plug gap, which I certainly hope you're right in your assumption on that. Taichi's not my favourite guy in the world, I'll be dead honest. But it sounds like, they told a decent story in terms of getting him there and it all made sense. So at the end of the day, logic and entertainment, that's the two things we've both said we always look for in wrestling. I'm not sure the match will be massively entertaining at New Beginning, but at least it's logical and it's an early defence for Naito.
Yeah,
and hopefully it's a V1 and we can be done with it and we can move on to something more interesting, maybe Kota Ibushi, as you mentioned. And the final thing I think you're going to take us through, what did Jay White do at New Year's Dash?
Jay White had a pretty good show, it must be said. Jay had already really established himself as a star coming out of Wrestle Kingdom. He was the breakout performance. And in the main event, he was tagging with Gedo and Fale, which was an interesting one, against Hiroshi Tanahashi, the new IWGP Heavyweight Champion and Ace of the Universe, Kazuchika Okada, because they're friends now, and the returning Yoshihashi, who was okay.
So we've got the mega powers in Japan and Yoshihashi.
Yeah, he was there too.
That's not an odd man out.
He was fair. Yoshihashi more than did his job in the match. But the match ended with the Switchblade Jay White standing tall, having won with the
Blade Runner.
I was going to say, forgetting the name now. It's been a long day. But what was important after the match, Jay White then seemed to be challenging Tanahashi, telling Tanahashi with expletives that he was an old, broken down man and that he can't stand anymore. So that it's going to be pretty easy to take the title off him because he beat Okada last night really easily and he could beat Tanahashi really quickly as well. Tana then got in the ring on his own, interesting decision for a babyface to make, and was then beaten down by the Bullet Club. Okada then came out to save him. Did not get the reaction that I thought he would. I thought he would get a massive Okada chant. Didn't happen. Perhaps that's just part of the story that they're telling with Okada, where he sort of loses his luster a little bit and then regains it. I don't know. But he didn't get the reaction I thought he would have. But Blade Runner was hit on both men, and Jay White stood tall over Tana and Okada to end New Year's Dash. It was pretty impressive. He raised the title and he was without doubt the star coming out of that show. 2019 will be the year of the Switchblade in New Japan. I very much believe that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you don't see that image of Jay White standing over Tanahashi and Okada and think this guy's going to be an important part going forward, I don't know what to tell you. Be interesting to see whether he gets a shot at New Beginning, whether it's pushed back. It certainly seems to be where they're going with it. Obviously, New Beginning, where Okada won the title in his second match back after Excursion. So there's a little bit of parallels there. I know White's been back here, but in terms of Super Push, there's definitely parallels there. But we'll see, and we'll wait and see what happens. But that's New Japan for the time being, unless you've got anything else you'd like to add.
The only thing that I would mention regarding New Year's Dash is obviously the Elite were not there. That makes sense, obviously, because they're still negotiating whatever any possible or no deal is going to be with All Elite. However, one other person that was not there is Kenny Omega. Now, we know Kenny Omega's been on being the Elite. He's been, a big part of the Elite and the success of that show. However, he's not been part of the promotion for All Elite so far, but he was not on New Year's Dash. He lost at Wrestle Kingdom, and he was not part of New Year's Dash. And that's interesting because we know there are several different options at the moment for Kenny Omega. WWE have supposedly put in a massively competitive offer for him. So it was very interesting to hear that he's not on the show when he is still, I believe, technically contracted for a little bit to New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumours flying about the expiry date of that contract. Most people seem to think around the end of January seems to be the prevailing theory. So definitely interesting times for Kenny Omega, interesting times for All Elite. Where does WWE sit in this? Where does New Japan sit in this? So many questions, not many answers. So we'll see what happens going forward. Yes, absolutely. So I think we've covered New Japan now then, and we can move on to sort of any other wrestling notes that we've got going on. I feel like we do need to hit on WWE because we've talked very little about them in this show, and I do realise it's the Dome show, so it was always going to be the massive talking point. But I think we need to hit on WWE. So did you catch any of your shows over sort of the Christmas New Year period?
The main things that I've seen in WWE have been largely from SmackDown. If I'm going to watch WWE, and I keep up with what they're doing, but the one that I watch most is SmackDown. The main things, I think we agree largely on what we like about SmackDown at the moment. The main things that I like about SmackDown at the moment are obviously the Becky Lynch babyface run, and Becky Lynch's just amazing last half of 2018 that she had, where she became easily the best thing about WWE. I always watch whatever segment that she is in, but also I think it's going to be massive in 2019. But the heel Daniel Bryan character and storyline, basically CJ Parker from NXT, where he's saving the world and you should hate him for it. He's basically running that character, but with his own slant on it. But his work in the ring has been absolutely fantastic. If anyone listening to this podcast did not see Bryan versus AJ from
TLC,
you need to go see it. It was an absolutely fantastic match. Adam and I have described it also eloquently as sneaky good.
Yeah.
But I've loved everything that Bryan's done since he's turned heel. He's getting legitimate heat as well. The crowd is booing him, which
we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, if I was in the arena, I think I'd cheer him. He's trying to save the planet. Why wouldn't we? But yeah, they're the main things that I watch and follow. We together we watch 205 Live as often as we can. We're both massive fans of that program. But I'll be honest, the main things that I watch at the moment are anything to do with Becky Lynch and anything to do with Daniel Bryan.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting story going on with AJ Styles and Vince McMahon. We'll see where that goes. He's the number one contender after winning a Fatal 5-Way. So they're running that match again, which is interesting considering they've gone down the whole line of no automatic rematches. And then AJ's won the number one contendership, which I guess is not an automatic rematch.
Earned it.
Yeah, he's earned it. But we're still going with the same match. So, and it looks like we're still heading towards Rusev versus Nakamura in a rematch as well, even though there's no real explanation from that apart from the fact that Nakamura just keeps attacking him. So I guess we'll see where that goes. The real interesting thing from the Becky point of view for me was her segment with Cena this week. When I watched the two of them in the ring, Becky Lynch seemed like the star. And like him or love him, John Cena has been a huge star in WWE for a long time now. So when you're stood in the ring with John Cena and you feel like the biggest star, that's huge, and that's what Becky felt like to me.
And they've got to capitalise on that. Becky Lynch absolutely feels like the biggest star that they've had in terms of both mainstream appeal and appeal to the hardcore fans, probably since the rise of Daniel Bryan, I would argue. I don't think they've had anyone that's had a connection with the audience quite like her since Bryan, and before that since CM Punk. So I think they've got to run with it.
You could make the argument that Ronda versus Becky is the biggest match they can do right now.
I think it's without a doubt. I don't even think there's a debate that's the biggest match that they have. I think anything with Brock perhaps, but it's not, I don't think there's really a debate there.
Yeah, no, totally agree. So we've kind of covered that. I wanted to touch a little bit on Japan still, but not New Japan. I caught the Kento Miyahara versus Kai Triple Crown Championship match from the 3rd of January show. You have not seen it yet, I know this.
But we love Kenta.
You know you need to see this match. Kai delivers a fantastic performance, and Kento Miyahara is Kento Miyahara. I'll not say much more than that because I don't want to spoil it for this guy over here, but it is an incredible match, and it doesn't hold up to the Tokyo Dome main event. I'm not going to pretend it does, but it is a really, really good match. And I definitely think it's one you all should check out.
For anyone that doesn't necessarily know Kai's story, Kai was going to be the ace of All Japan. It was obvious. He was being built towards it. You could see it. He had charisma from being a very, very young wrestler. And then the split in All Japan happened between where it went to All Japan still, and then Wrestle 1. Kai made the decision to go to Wrestle 1, which turned into, quite honestly, a horrific company that seemed to have no idea of what it was. And as a result, his stock within Japanese wrestling went down. But he's always had the ability. He's always been a great wrestler. So for him to have a great match with Kento says a lot about him. So I can't wait to see it.
And one thing I think we should quickly touch on is tonight, as we are recording this, TNA will be holding their homecoming. Sorry, I shouldn't say TNA. Impact Wrestling will be holding.
It's TNA.
Impact Wrestling will be hosting their January pay-per-view, Homecoming, and they're going back to the Asylum.
Back home.
Yeah, they're going back home, Nashville, Tennessee. The card looks strong to me. I don't know what you think. Yeah,
it looks really good. I like several of the matches.
Mm-hmm.
Several.
Option C, Brian Cage is cashing that in. He's going to be challenging Johnny Mundo. I am big fans of both guys. Probably Mundo more than Cage, but that's going to be a huge match.
We've seen it before, Lucha Underground as well. We know it's a good match.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll see what they can do. Arguably the best women's wrestler not in WWE. I take that back. Not arguably. Yeah. The best women's wrestler not in WWE. Tessa Blanchard will be defending her title against Taya Valkyrie in a rematch from Bound for Glory, but with a little twist this time, with Gail Kim being special guest referee. So, interesting to see where they take that. I know you've been keeping up with Impact maybe a little bit more than me. Is there anything else in that than what meets the eye?
A little bit. So what's been happening is sort of Tessa's become more and more arrogant as time's gone on, quite rightly, because she's the best wrestler that they have, and she's been a dominant champion for quite some time now. She then ended up attacking a referee because she was attacking an opponent that she just hadn't had a match with. She then the referee was trying to drag her off that person, and Tessa then attacked the referee and continued the attack, didn't stop. So as a result, people came out to try and stop her, and couldn't. And then the one person who did come out and could stop her was Gail Kim. And when I saw that segment, I was like, oh my God, they're going to have a match between Tessa and Gail, because that would be absolutely massive for TNA if they could, or Impact, sorry, if they could get Gail to do one more match and put Tessa over. But the next week, I believe it was the next week, it might have been the week after, but Gail was then announced as the special referee, which obviously has angered Tessa and has really annoyed her. So that's where that's come from. So there's a little wrinkle to it.
Yeah, I still think we could see Gail Tessa somewhere down the line.
Hopefully.
We'll see what happens tonight. The rest of the card is filled out with really good matches. I'm quite interested in the Sami Callihan, Willie Mack match. There's a lot going on that show. And I definitely feel like Impact's made a lot of steps this year.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly not what it was in 2005 and 2006 in terms of its roster, but in terms of its stability, in terms of its booking, it appears to be a lot better. It's actually a company that for a long time, I just stopped checking what was happening because I knew that it would be dreadful. Now I actively check every week and see what happens on Impact. Some of their stories can still be a bit wacky in terms of the Ali storyline that they've got going at the moment. It's wacky, but it's very good. But by and large, they tell really good stories. They have good wrestlers, some of them very good, like Johnny Mundo or Johnny Impact. But they've got some fantastic wrestlers, and by and large, they put on a really good show, and it's going to be great to see them back in the Asylum, back where they come from. So it's going to be a cool moment for anyone that watched early TNA like I did. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And with that being said, we are usually going to have a closing segment where we talk about this and that. It will be different every week. But this week we are going to touch on our favourite things in pro wrestling history, just to give you a little bit more flavour around what it is we like. We're going to keep it short and sweet because I can tell we have overran what our intention was in terms of the length of this podcast.
Almost like we like to talk.
Yeah, you might like the sound of our own voices. Anyway, so I'm going to let Jonathan take the hit first. Go on, hit me. Favourite match of all time?
Right, my favourite match of all time. This is a match that I've seen more times than I can count. It is a late 80s match for the NWA World's Heavyweight title between Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat from Chi-Town Rumble in, I believe, 1989.
Yeah.
I believe it's 89.
Yeah.
It's just a masterpiece of a match. It's very much a Ric Flair match. Flair's, the dastardly heel who has all these women on his arm and how dare he be so cool. And then Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is the family man who just wants to provide for his family, and winning the world title will get him more money and help him provide for his family. It's just a masterpiece. If you haven't watched that match, you need to. It is one of, I think it is, but it's certainly one of Flair's best performance of his career. And when you've got a wrestler like Ric Flair and it's one of his best matches, you need to get to see it. It's not on YouTube anymore though.
Yeah, great match. One of my favourites of all time as well. But if I'm hitting my favourite of all time, and you know exactly what I'm going to say here, Nigel McGuinness, Bryan Danielson from Liverpool, a show I could have gone to if I'd only asked my parents' permission.
Idiot.
And I was too scared to do so. Don't judge me. But yeah, Dragon versus Nigel from Unified 2006. Unbelievable match. It was a unification match. Nigel was the pure champion. Dragon was the ROH World Champion. It is an absolute masterpiece. There is everything in that match for me. And it is just something that I absolutely love. And I don't think it can ever be topped. I can objectively look at other matches and think maybe they're a little bit better, but that is my favourite match of all time. Okada Omega from last year, potentially a better match, but it's not my favourite. It'll always be Dragon Nigel for me.
I think greatest matches are great in terms of what they mean to you. I could name several matches that I love and are really high up there in terms of my favourite matches, but I don't think anybody else would claim that they're great.
That brings us on to our next one. So our next one is your, how do I delicately put this, your, not the match you're ashamed of loving, but the match that maybe is not as great, and you know it's not that great, but you absolutely love it for everything. I'll take this one because I can see you thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is from ECW One Night Stand 2006, and it is Terry Funk, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy against Edge, Mick Foley and Lita. And I'm not going to go down in history saying that this was an all-time classic. I'm not going to go down and saying it was some kind of technical barn burner, because look at the people involved. It was Terry Funk when he could no longer go. It was Mick Foley when he was still hobbling. It was Beulah McGillicuddy who could never work. And it was Lita who could work but wasn't in there with the right people, and at that point was kind of slowing down in the ring. But they tell a phenomenal story, and it is such a fun match to watch. Like, whenever I just want something on in the background that I can just enjoy, I'll pop One Night Stand in because the whole show's fun. But that's the one match that I will stop what I'm doing and I'll sit down and I'll pay me full attention to it and just watch it in total.
Oh, I'm trying to... Right, mine would probably be from WrestleMania 15. Adam knows what I'm going to say now that I've said this. One of my favourite feuds of all time is X-Pac against Shane McMahon for the European title. It's one of my favourite feuds. I think partly because I loved it when I was younger, and it's just stayed with me. But Shane against X-Pac from WrestleMania is a match that I loved, and I loved when I was younger. But I wouldn't necessarily go around saying, "Oh yeah, you should definitely see that match." But in terms of what it means to me, I absolutely love it. And I'm trying to think of any others, but I think that's the main one that I can say that meant the most to me and that I still remember as loving.
And with that, what, favourite show next?
Favourite show, right, there's two. One's very obvious.
Well, one we share, I think.
WrestleMania X7.
Yeah.
That was weird.
It was.
So, WrestleMania X7, yes, certainly. I don't really want to go into that. If you're going to talk about WrestleMania X7, I'll let you, because just the peak of wrestling, like the biggest show that ever happened in wrestling, with the greatest, in terms of stars, main event that ever happened in wrestling. Mine's sort of predictably, I think, from what I've said during this show, it's a New Japan show. It's Battle Formation 96. It was held at the Tokyo Dome. And it's largely because of one match. There was a really great Buta against Jinsei Shinzaki match on that show, which was very bloody, but very, very good. But it's largely because of one match. That's the reason why I love that show so much. And it's Shinya Hashimoto fighting for the IWGP Heavyweight title against the invading champion Nobuhiko Takada from UWFI, which there's a much longer story to that match, but UWFI was a shoot fighting promotion designed to be showing that wrestling is real, and it promoted itself as real, as a shoot rather than a work, and it said that all other kinds of wrestling were rubbish and that New Japan sucked. But then as it reduced and became, much less successful, it had to work with other wrestling promotions. So it worked with New Japan. New Japan largely destroyed it because New Japan had been so insulted by it. New Japan hold grudges, for anyone that doesn't know their history. But Takada was the champion. Takada was in the around 92 to 94, arguably the biggest wrestling star in Japan. He was an absolute megastar. They ran a stadium that held around 60,000 or 40,000, sorry, but they ran a massive stadium, and he was a massive star. He'd won the title, and he was going against Shinya Hashimoto. If you've not seen him, he was an absolute tank of a man who had legs that when they kicked you, I think you stayed kicked for about a week and a half, and you sort of moved into a different, postcode than you were already in. But the match is amazing, and it's very real in terms of the way that it's wrestled. It looks like a real fight, which is a lot of the style that I like.
Shoot
style, yeah, and that it's designed to look as real as possible. But when Hashimoto's finisher was the Brainbuster, which is Austin Aries' finishing move as well. And when he lifts Takada up the Brainbuster, the Japanese crowd at that point didn't necessarily pop and make really loud noise for things, just explode. And when Hashimoto wins and brings the title back to New Japan, it is a massive moment, and it's a great celebration moment for Hashimoto, who was, in the way that Tanahashi is the ace, or Okada, arguably now, is the ace of New Japan. Hashimoto was during the 1990s. So that was mine, and it's largely because of one match that I just love. Adam?
Well, I think WrestleMania X7 is probably going to be mine. There is a lot of shows out there that I could throw out there. I love Money in the Bank 2011.
I love Mania 19.
Yeah, Mania 19, great show. Dominion from last year, will go down. I think it's still too soon for me to look at it that way, but it will go down as one of my favourite shows of all time. But WrestleMania X7, like you said, the peak of wrestling, Rock Austin, my guy versus your guy, ironically enough. But the depth on the card, Undertaker was absolutely fantastic, and it's probably forgotten in the annals of history because of how good everything else was on the show. TLC 2 is on that show, but more than anything else, I think it was the feeling that this was the most special wrestling is, and ever will be.
Yeah, it's never been the same. It's never been the same as it was.
I don't think it ever was before. I mean, I wasn't there for the rock and wrestling era in the 80s and the NBC shows that did the Saturday Night main events. Yeah. They must have been huge, but to me, that's the pinnacle of wrestling, and it kind of, like you say, all went downhill following that. But an amazing show, and I'm sure nobody listening to this podcast hasn't seen that show, but if somehow you haven't seen that show, go and watch it. All of it.
Your way to see it.
Except for maybe the 6-man tag at the start of the show. But apart from that, all the show. But with that said, I think that'll do it for the first episode of the 2-Man Booth. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable time. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us. I hope you'll join us next week. And in the meantime, you can follow our Twitter account at 2manbooth. Anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, just we'll be doing this every single week, and we hope that you come back and listen next week.
Sorry, we're out of time. We'll see you next week on the 2Man Booth.